William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
And welcome to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. The off Lerone Landis will be back with us next week. Our guest today is Tanisha Tyler Carr. She is from the Alzheimer's Association, and she's here to help us forget the last year. Welcome, Tanisha.
Hi, how are you?
Good. And that's not why she's here. We're here to talk about, well, I don't remember. What are we here to talk about, Patti?
Alzheimer's and how it affects our community and doesn't discriminate against us.
Mm-hmm.
It can be anyone can be hit with it. So we want to talk about that and resources for people who are facing that with a family member or a loved one, a friend, and what we can do to help each other.
Tanisha, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
We were talking during the last show as I was multitasking and doing Alzheimer's and doing the Jewish Music Hour, the totally inappropriate Jewish Music Hour Christmas show. So I'm not even thinking straight. I'm changing gears right now. Alzheimer's affects all of us, and it affects all of us equally.
Absolutely.
The resources of the Alzheimer's Association are open to everybody, and especially you have resources for the LGBT community.
Absolutely.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, absolutely. The Alzheimer's Association wants everyone to know that, like you stated, Patti, that this disease does not discriminate. Understanding this disease, getting the facts and figures, the Alzheimer's Association has been around since the 80s, and we are here to educate everyone, to let them know about the resources that we have available. If you are affected by this disease, if you're living with a diagnosis or you're caregiving for someone who has this diagnosis, and specifically within our LGBT communities, we understand that sometimes accessing health care and resources, sometimes can be an issue just because of specific issues you may face in the LGBT community. And the Alzheimer's Association is here to let you know that we do have resources that are very LGBT inclusive. We have caregiver support groups that are free. They are once a month. We have them all over the DFW area. We have them for the 34 counties that we cover. We also have a great relationship with local churches specifically, and different communities specifically, where we have education classes that are free. We also have a 1-800 number, which is our 24-hour, 24/7 helpline. You can call that number any day, anytime, and there will be someone who can answer your questions, can give you support about local resources, and also have that care consultation with you just about what you're dealing with, understanding your role as a caregiver if you're caregiving, understanding what resources are available if you are living with this disease specifically.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm finding, my father went through Alzheimer's about 10, 12 years ago. My father-in-law is going through Alzheimer's now, and they're progressing completely differently. Any advice I had from my mother-in-law in how to help, it's wrong. Do you find that it's not a disease that has one way that this is how it progresses, like certain diseases do?
Absolutely. With this disease, it is a disease that affects all of us differently. It is really very based on your own biological makeup and your own general health. So we all may be living with a form of dementia, but we may...
Especially Patti.
But we may be progressing differently, and that's just because of your own biological makeup. So sometimes it's really hard to compare what another person is going through who's living with this diagnosis and the other, because everybody is different. Their overall general health is different, so that's really not uncommon.
So how long does the average person live with Alzheimer's, or what's the range, really? Because there isn't
Well, it once again, it does depend on general health, but also we are seeing typically people who are living with Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. The reason why I say that is Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia you hear about, but there are other types of dementia like Parkinson's disease, mild cognitive impairment, Huntington's disease, Lewy body disease. These are all other forms of dementia that are just as devastating as Alzheimer's disease. And typically what we are seeing is we've seen a lifespan of 8 to 20 years, but everybody is different. Some people supersede that just because they're taking care of their general health. So if we wanted to really specify a typical lifespan, it would be 8 to 20 years.
Are other illnesses prevalent with people who have Alzheimer's? Or are they more likely to contract other things just because you're not taking care of yourself as well anymore? Or don't we really know?
Well, when it comes to Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia, we already know that that's a degenerative disease. So other issues that may occur may come just because, like you said, general health issues, other issues that affect general health. So it's not uncommon that we see people who are living with this form of dementia that's already a degenerative disease, and then they may have other health issues that they incur over time for other reasons.
One of the reasons that we're talking about this and continue to talk about it on this show is not that Alzheimer's is an LGBT disease.
Absolutely.
It hits everybody. But there have been a number of studies that show that the caregiver in the family tends to be the gay kid, the lesbian kid, the transgender kid. And why? A number of reasons, but because, this sister has kids and this brother has kids and they have their, and the gay kid's there to help. And it's interesting also because in a number of cases, it's the gay kid who was never accepted by the family. Not in all cases, but in some cases, the kid wasn't accepted, and all of a sudden, he or she is put in the position of being the caregiver for mom or dad, which is kind of interesting. So it does disproportionately affect the LGBT community as caregivers. What are some of the things that, just talking about caregivers in general, what are some of the things that a caregiver should know when they're beginning to deal with Alzheimer's?
Well, I would say definitely when it comes to caregivers of this particular disease, understanding that, like you said, this is a everyone disease, and this also takes a community approach because of how this disease affects a person long term. Understanding that incorporating your community resources, sometimes your family and friends, if you're involved in a local church community or involved in a local organization, sometimes thinking outside the box for your support. And also understanding that the Alzheimer's Association has 24/7 support through our helpline, which is a 24-hour number where you can call and get resources and support and have someone who's really there to help you on that journey so you're not alone. Understanding the resources that are available in your community. We have caregiver support groups. Understanding also the disease. Understanding the disease, how it affects your loved one, how it affects their behavior, their communication, how it's going to affect their health long term, and also understanding how to kind of meet them where they are. Understanding how to respond to those behavioral issues that may occur, communication issues and changes that may occur. And also, number one thing I tell every caregiver, as with anything, it's kind of that plane analogy where you have to put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on your loved one or child. It's the same principle. You have to make sure you are taking care of yourself, because that person is going to be dependent on you to be an extension of them as their abilities change. So making sure you're taking care of yourself, making sure you're taking care of your health, going to your doctor's visits, getting your health in, making it a priority. That is most important.
Okay, so Patty, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we were talking before the show about the fact that these support groups that the Alzheimer's Association sponsors, which I think is a fantastic thing, because you need to have that connection of a network of people who are experiencing the same thing, regardless of what it is. It could be Alzheimer's, it could be a death, could be lots of different things. My dog just had puppies. Lots of support groups out there where you can reach out to others who are going through the same things. But I think it's really interesting that you were saying that the support groups are not kind of carved off in different chunks based on how long you've been caregiving or how long the patients or the loved ones has had Alzheimer's, or where you are in the process, or anything. And I think that's really remarkable, because you really get a chance to learn from others, especially if someone's years into this experience. They have so much wisdom to share with somebody who's just their loved one's just been diagnosed, and they're going to be the caregiver.
Another thing about a support group, after Brian died, we started a support group, and it started with about 4 of us who had lost our spouses within about a month of each other. And being an LGBT support group just gave us, we were just similar in a certain way, and could just talk about grieving and know you're not doing it wrong. And I would think the Alzheimer's support groups would do the same thing for people that no, you're not crazy. That did happen. Because sometimes some really odd things happen. I remember with my father, one of the things that I'm thinking, no, something's wrong here, was when he called me one day and said, "How come you haven't talked to me? How come you haven't called me in 2 weeks? And we haven't." And I said, "Well, you can always call me. The phones go in both directions, but we just spoke this morning." And that's one of those things. What is going on with him? We just talked, and you want to wring his neck sometimes. And it's okay to feel that way. And a support group will tell you, yeah, this is tough to deal with. You want to wring their neck sometimes.
That's a great point. I mean, that's the point of a support group. And with our support groups are not separated by a different type of caregiver, or an age, or a gender, or a specific journey in the disease. It is for all caregivers who are going through that. So you have caregivers who are at different points, and different backgrounds, different lifestyles, different ethnicities, who are coming together for a common cause. We are dealing with this issue. We're caregiving for a person who has Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. Sometimes I need to talk to someone who really gets what I'm understanding, what I'm going through, and understands me, because sometimes maybe I don't have that sounding board with my family and my friends and my community, because they just don't understand the journey. And like you said, someone who's maybe at the beginning of that journey, and someone who's been in that journey a little bit longer, just having that support. Hey, this is what I did. These are the resources that I use. This is my relationship with the Alzheimer's Association. This is what I learned. I have a great facilitator who always gets me resources and education and different things, and just having that support. And our support group attendees really enjoy having that camaraderie. And a lot of times they build that friend connection and that family connection, because they have a different community to really be with them on this journey.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the beginning of Alzheimer's, where it comes from, and how do we know somebody has Alzheimer's? There is no test for Alzheimer's.
Well, there's no specific one test that says, okay, this is one test.
No blood test that you take and you find out you have it.
What this is a series of tests. Now, obviously, what we've done over the years, we've gotten kinder with science and more sophisticated with medical testing. There are a series of tests that can help determine whether a person is affected with a form of dementia like Alzheimer's or another type. Typically, it starts with your PCP, going to your annual checkup, getting your analysis, blood panel, all of that good stuff, just to look at your overall health. And then also getting a referral to someone who specializes specifically in the type of series of testing you need to determine if dementia is at play. That's typically a neurologist, a geriatrician, internist, anybody who specializes in geriatric care. And they will do a series of other testing. A mini cognition test is kind of a test where they ask you to draw a clock counterclockwise, and they ask you different questions because they're testing your memory and your receptive and expressive skills. And then they go further into doing a PET scan or MRI, because what they're looking for specifically is seeing changes in your brain, in your neurological center, shrinkage of brain cells, any type of abnormalities. And that is the type of testing that they do. It's a series of tests that they do to determine whether a person is living with a form of dementia.
We do know that it is somewhat hereditary, correct?
For some. Not for all, but for some. Genetics can play a rare part. There are some people who do have a genetic disposition because there are several family members, male and female, who will have several copies of the specific gene mutation for this disease. So for some people, it can be a genetic connection, but that's not the case for all.
Yeah, the vast majority of people have not had Alzheimer's in their family, particularly. I remember reading one time that it was only a slight percentage increase if your father or mother had Alzheimer's for you to get it. But I guess there is some genetic component.
There are some, it is rare, but there are some families that do have a genetic disposition to this disease.
We're going to talk about some of these symptoms and what age you should start even worrying about it. Let's take our break. We're talking to Tanisha Tyler Carr. She's from the Alzheimer's Association. Before we go to the break, the last 2 weeks of this show are now available on demand at knon.org. KNON has started a free on-demand streaming with the help of Radio Free America. Go to knon.org, click on the image that says listen to the last 2 weeks of your favorite show, of course being this one, and never miss your favorite KNON show again. KNON on-demand streaming. Listen to what you want at knon.org. And our own personal note is that we also record these, and they're on YouTube. And you can always catch up on shows that you missed, because why were you not in front of your radio at 1 o'clock on Sunday? I'm Dave Taffet. I'm here in the studio with the late Patti Fink, and our guest is Tanisha Tyler Carr. She's from the Alzheimer's Association. We'll be back with more of that right after this.
This is Rollins Gilliland, and I'm listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3, and darn glad to be doing it.
And welcome back to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. Our guest is Tanisha Tyler Carr. She's from the Alzheimer's Association. I forgot what my next question. No. The last person from the Alzheimer's Association who was here, I kept asking the same question over and over again. She was looking at me, and I just said, "That's just me."
David, his own category.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the symptoms of Alzheimer's and what age you can even get it. First of all, you surprised me when during the break you said you had a case that you knew of at what age?
Well, we had a case years ago where a gentleman was 25 years of age.
25? Do we know why somebody would
When this gentleman's particular case, it was a gentleman who had severe injury, had a severe accident, and he had severe brain damage. And because of that, the physician advised his parents that he could possibly, because of the damage, if he were to survive the injury, that he could possibly acquire Alzheimer's related dementia.
Yeah, I've heard of cases early onset Alzheimer's in their 50s.
There are 5.4 million Americans who are living with Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. In the U.S., 5% of that population is what we consider younger onset. Younger onset are people who are living with these forms of dementia who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And typically with that population, we do see that there is a strong genetic connection.
And then other people develop at 60s,
65
70s.
and older is the typical onset.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the symptoms are that you look for. And it's rare that you find it in yourself. You find it in other people. For example, Patti can't remember that our show starts at 1 o'clock on Sundays. But she doesn't have Alzheimer's, we're assuming, because she doesn't show any other symptoms. It's just that one thing.
Well, typically, we all kind of freak out when we think about memory loss, just because, we sometimes are just rushing in our day, and we forget things. I've left my keys here, or I'm at the point now where I'm leaving my cell phone everywhere. I'm like, I just must not want it because I'm leaving my cell phone everywhere. So there's memory issues that just happen as we age, just because we're not maybe as alert as we used to be, or maybe we're just moving too fast. Normal aging, there may be some memory-related issues, but they're completely normal.
So as Patti ages, she might forget that the show starts at 1 o'clock, but also she might forget it's on Sunday.
She may, but that doesn't mean that she has a form of dementia. Typically, what you see, the difference is when you're thinking about dementia-related aging. That's, first of all, it's important for everyone to know that a form of dementia like Alzheimer's and other types of dementia is not a normal part of aging ever. So no matter what you've heard, that is absolutely not true. It is not a normal part of your aging process. It is abnormal all the time, every time. Also understanding that when you're talking about dementia-related memory loss, you're talking about memory loss that's so severe that it completely disrupts your whole day, meaning that you're losing your short-term memory, the ability to retrace your steps. So for people who are noticing changes with either in themselves or their loved ones, they're noticing that their loved ones are not able to remember key spaces and times in their day, meaning I may have talked to you Friday, but then when we talk again, I have no memory that we talked Friday. And you're trying to make me remember, no, we talked Friday, but I literally have no memory of that.
So very often, it's somebody else who's going to notice these things in you as opposed to realizing this yourself.
Absolutely, because in the beginning stages of this disease, short-term memory loss, it can be very severe. So you're losing the present. Also, other signs would be the memory loss. Like I said, things like that. That's completely abnormal. You should never lose days and pockets of time. Losing the ability to do everyday things like maybe balance a checkbook or make coffee, or there are some people who forget the steps to brushing their teeth. They're in the middle of the process but cannot remember the steps. And it's that severe, and it's also scary. Also, personality changes that are just completely abnormal and bizarre. Some people who may have been very pleasant, very easygoing, very soft-spoken, now they're cussing like a sailor, and everything is maddening to them. They're having a complete personality change. Issues with judgment and reasoning. People in the beginning stages, when we talk about knowing the 10 signs, we do have literature on our website and also brochures about knowing the 10 signs. We also teach classes about knowing the 10 signs. Specifically, we're talking about that memory loss that's so severe, issues with judgment, personality. Judgment can be a real issue, and it can be unsafe where people are not like some people may be putting metal objects in the refrigerator because they're losing that ability to have that orientation that I should not do this. Or sometimes people are overspending or underspending because they're losing the ability to make that balance and really understand I'm taking too much money out of my account and I'm overpaying my bills, or I'm not paying
my father couldn't distinguish between bills and solicitations, and therefore I became a member of the NRA. Thanks to
your dad.
Thanks to a solicitation that came.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because people who are living with this form of dementia don't understand that sometimes they're being taken advantage of.
Right.
They go
in Florida, the Attorney General's office opened an office on abuse of the elderly specifically for those things right in the middle of Palm Beach County, because that is scam central for all of the elderly people who have some form of dementia and can't distinguish those things.
Absolutely. And it's because if you, in your mind, thinking it's time to go pay rent or pay bills, but you don't realize you just paid rent, or you run into someone who says, hey, there's a huge hole in your roof, I can take care of that for you. Just give me about $500 and I'll take care of that. And then you give money to this person and they're gone, and you have no memory of that interaction. And so these are that's typically when it's more severe. But when you're talking about knowing the signs of understanding that maybe dementia is at play, we're talking about those kinds of changes. That's a completely and totally abnormal. Also changes in speech and cognitive skills, ability to think and reason and have sound judgment. A lot of that declines for a person who's living with a form of dementia.
One of the things that tipped us off that my father had some form of dementia was, and Alzheimer's in particular. He lived in Palm Beach County, and between Palm Beach and Dade County, which is Miami, is Broward County. So his mother in the 1960s lived down in Dade County, and his long-term memory was fine. Until the day he died, he recognized me. I don't know if he was recognizing me as whatever age I was, or me as a 20-year-old, but he recognized me and knew who I was. Anyway, we went from his house. I said, let's go down, let's see where your mother used to live, and we'll have lunch in Miami. So we left his apartment, got on I-95, and as we're driving south, each exit further from where he was, he got more and more nervous and more nervous, and I mean, to the point where I wasn't sure I was going to be able to keep him in the car. We got down to Dade County, and I said, okay, I need your help here. Do you know where the exit is for the causeway that goes to Miami? And he knew exactly where it was. And I said, okay, now where do I turn? He told me where to turn. He said, yeah, now turn here, and that was her apartment. Knew exactly where we were. When we were in Miami Beach, he was fine. When we were in Delray Beach, where he lived, he was fine. In between, he was just so nervous because he wasn't recognizing where he was.
Exactly, and when it comes to talking about driving and just daily life, especially as things progress, that becomes a safety issue, because we see it all the time in the news. We see the silver alerts. We see the critical missings. And a lot of those individuals are people who are living with a form of dementia, who have gotten confused either behind the wheel or maybe taking a trip to an everyday activity like going to the store, or maybe driving to go pick someone up from school and losing the ability to remember how to get back. And that is a huge issue specifically in this community when it comes to driving. So those are definitely signs too that, okay, if they're getting lost in familiar places to the point to where they're driving around for hours upon time because they're not able to find where they're supposed to be, that's a huge issue. Also issues with we know how crazy traffic is on 75 and 635. It's just absolutely insane. But imagine having symptoms of a form of dementia with the confusion and the agitation and also the anxiety, because your depth perception changes, your ability to really safely judge your distance from another vehicle, or their navigating around you in traffic. The anxiety increases, and it makes it very scary and unsafe for people who are living with a form of
So when should we take Patty's license? I mean, somebody with Alzheimer's, take their license away.
Well, obviously, we always say, of course, the best case scenario is as early as possible. But when you are seeing that this person is no longer a safe driver, like if you're terrified to be in the vehicle with them, and you're terrified to, drive around with them, then you should be having this conversation. Because if you're terrified to be in the vehicle with them, what do you think is happening when you're not in the vehicle?
Well, and I think that's a big issue with a lot of people, and it's not just people who are going through Alzheimer's, but people in general who are aging and become physically unable to drive their car to the same level and quality that they used to, because I've said this many times, because we're not a public transportation kind of country, and we're certainly not a public transportation kind of town or state, and people insist on having their horse, and so the car keys are a very big deal, and for many it's the sign of independence.
Absolutely.
And for an adult, and a mature adult, to lose their independence, their ability. Suddenly now they're dependent on somebody else, and they cannot get on their horse and go somewhere. That in itself, whether you have Alzheimer's or not, that's a very big deal, I think, in the life of a person, because once you reach that point, there's so many other things that may be taken away from you that are your sources of independence, your waypoints to reach out to the world on your own. And not have to rely on somebody else.
So do you have some advice on how do you do it? I want to know if the way I did it was right.
Well, what we do, like I said, the Alzheimer's Associations, when I say we have resources for everything we do, we have that Taking the Keys conversation. On our website, there is a online resource center called the Alzheimer's Caregiver Center. It is amazing. It talks about anything and everything from disease education, stages, daily activities, behaviors, communication, your role as a caregiver, that resources for their person if they're living with a diagnosis, but also it talks about safety. And there is a whole center that specifically talks about driving. And there are video tutorials about how to have that conversation. We also have resources for maybe doing what we call a driving contract, where you and that person sit down and you have a compassionate conversation about the changes you're seeing, and you have them sign and you sign, and get it notarized that this is a driving contract, that when your driving becomes unsafe at this point, that you and I both agree that we're going to have this conversation and take the keys, and talk about alternative forms of transportation, getting your family and friends in that conversation to support that person.
With my father, driving was not one of the indications because he was always a horrible driver.
Imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, and the last, let's see, he got remarried in 1981 and she lived till 1997. They had to get a new car every year because it was always wrecked. But when I was 16, I was working with him one summer, and I drove, and it was not legal for a 16-year-old to drive in New York City. I drove to the office because back then it was not safe to drive with him. So that was not an indication. However, my father was in the hospital and the doctor called me, said, I can't release him to go to his own home alone. He said, I don't know when you saw him last, but he's at a point where he cannot live on his own. So I went down to Florida, and in 1 week, I took away his mail, his driver's license, his condo, everything. And we moved him to a memory care facility. And we had a conversation when he realized that his memory of how he ended up in the hospital was completely different than what actually happened. Because we happened to be in his breakfast restaurant, and his regular waitress said, I'm so glad to see you. I said, he's been in the hospital. She said, I know, he was here and passed out. And I called 911, and I've been watching his car. I said, his car is here? Because he thought he had had a car accident.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I said, now do you understand why you have a choice of either coming to live with me or living someplace here in a memory care facility? And he said, yes. And he did get it at that point. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but I can complain about things.
Yeah.
His memory care facility, they were wonderful. They took such great care of him. So that's how I did it. In just 1 week, I took everything from him. It was the hardest week of my life, easily, because I had somebody fighting me every step of the way, and that's going to happen.
It is, because we want our independence.
Sure.
We don't want that to be taken away from us.
And what you encountered is not uncommon. That's honestly the best case scenario. I work with people who, have to go to extreme measures because that person is refusing to give up the keys. They're having accidents. It's very dangerous. They're getting pulled over by law enforcement all the time. They're wandering, and it becomes a very different conversation. So I would say if you did that right, if it was successful and, it still preserved his dignity and you were still able to keep him safe, then that was successful. Everybody's situation is different. Sometimes the earliest, the better. Sometimes that opportunities present themselves when that person, physician and other people are on board saying, no, you just can't drive. Oh, no, you need to let your son or your daughter or your spouse do this or do that. That's ideal, but not everybody has that situation. So it's about really evaluating the situation and keeping them safe. And, it's about, obviously, you deal with that emotional turmoil of removing that independence and feeling like you're disrespecting their wishes. And it's just, you have to remember and understand that because of the nature of the disease and what it does to them, and the false sense of the ability that they're functioning just fine, you want to protect them from that. And sometimes you have to take certain measures, because rather you take the measures to prevent them from driving and getting an accident and do what you have to do, versus the alternative, them driving and seriously hurting themselves, or getting lost and not being found, or hurting someone else behind the wheel. I say I'd rather you have hurt feelings and a little animosity than a tragedy.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
What are some of the ways to do what I had to do other than what I did?
Well, once again, if you can have this conversation as early as possible, if they're still cognizant and able to have this conversation, driving contract, having that conversation, or just having family support. Maybe you do a compassionate family intervention. These are things we notice. This is where we are. I'm sorry, but we're just going to have to take the keys. It's no longer safe for you to drive. These are some alternatives if you need this, if you need that.
So in the end, you really have to have it in your mind, okay, I have to be firm on this. This isn't a negotiation, really.
And it's only because, I'm not going to say it's not a negotiation. You want to try as much as you can to, of course, be compassionate and understanding, but you also have to understand sometimes they're not going to understand that you have to do these things to protect them even from themselves. So you have to have a plan in place, and actually getting that support is very key if you're going to have this conversation.
We need to take a break. You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 Knon FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink, and we'll be back with more talking with Tanisha Tyler Carr from the Alzheimer's Association right after this.
Hi, this is Valletta Lil, and I listen to Lambda Weekly. I hope that you will too.
And welcome back to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here with the late Patti Fink, and Tanisha Tyler Carr is our guest. She is from the Alzheimer's Association. Patti, you were just saying during the break.
Yeah, we were just talking about how I work for a health IT company, and years ago we had gotten involved with writing some software for a sector of the Canadian health system. And what they do there is they have acute beds in hospitals, and then they have everything else. And everything else is called home care. And they have a program for everybody. I mean, caregivers are paid, so if they have to give up their employment and take care of a loved one, they're still able to have income to pay their bills and their mortgage and all of those things. But they also had like day respite care, where you could take your loved one and they could be really cared for by professionals for a period of time, whether it's a morning or a whole day, in some cases overnight, and so give those caregivers a break. And how they spent their break was up to them, but they had a break from the care. And those kinds of things I think are so important. I know we had a neighbor down the street who was caring for her mother, who was in her mid to late 90s and living with Alzheimer's. And I remember encountering her a few years ago, and we said, well, how's your mom? And she said, oh, she's fine. Meaning, she's fine. She's talking about when she was 12, and
Absolutely.
All of these great stories that she shares with family members and friends. But everyone around her was still very much struggling. And so that can be really hard. So can you talk a little bit about what resources might be available? I know we talked a little bit before, but about caregivers and some of the things that they need to be looking for to see that maybe they do need a break.
Absolutely. Well, we talk a lot about caregiver stress, and you're very right. The number one thing we will do in a care consultation is a free service that we offer for anyone who's affected by this disease, whether you're living with a diagnosis or you're a caregiver, or we have doctors who call us, we have psychiatrists who call us, we have professionals who call us who are caregivers in their own right, and just kind of the things that they go through. We talk about a caregiver stress check. We actually even have it online through our caregiver center, where you just kind of look at things like to check your stress level. If you're not taking care of your health, if you're not feeling well, if you're overexhausted, these are things that are a big warning sign that, hey, I need to think outside my box. Also, like you said, obviously our healthcare system is a lot different than
Yes.
candidates. So when you're looking at getting some support, we do have, like I said, a resource list for 34 counties. So we're talking on those resources. We have resources for in-home caregiving agencies, whether it be companion services or medical, depending on what their situation is. That's always an asset. Also working with your doctor, because sometimes your doctor can write a prescription for in-home care. Looking at different organizations like the Department of Aging and Disability Services, Area Agency on Aging, and different types of community organizations that really specialize in respite care, giving caregivers that relief, because that's very important. We also have at the Alzheimer's Association, we have caregiver support groups, but we also have what we call Caregivers Day Out programs from different organizations in all over the area that have Caregivers Day Out program where it could be a church or a local community that will have a program for people who are in the early to mid stages who are still able to be functionally independent but can be in a program with other people who are living with a diagnosis in the same category while that caregiver goes to do what they need to do. And even it's also an inclusive opportunity for that caregiver and that person to have an interaction within a community of other people who are in the same journey and have that support, and it just really does something for a caregiver. Also looking into in-home care specifically if you need that. And also when we think about long-term, it's a hard conversation to have, but sometimes your caregiving role is that you understand the disease is progressing and they need something more than in-home care. They need something more than you can provide. And then looking into talking to a geriatric case manager or a senior living specialist about placement and understanding that there may come a time when they need more care than you can provide at home, and you may need to look into what we consider memory care placement in assisted living property or nursing home.
And one thing that comes with that, and this is where call the Alzheimer's Association because they can help. The idea of placing a parent or spouse in a memory care facility or any sort of senior facility, there's a lot of guilt that goes along with that.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's a horrible thing to even think about. I was lucky. I looked at 10 different places. I had been to, by the 7th or 8th one, I was about to give up and just say, no, he's coming to live with me. And the last one that I went to, I was like, oh, and it's only how much? And between my father's Social Security and I was able to contribute a certain amount to it I was able to afford it. And what a relief. And I mean, these were really good people who, it was the kind of facility where he never progressed that badly. And so in the morning, he was used to having breakfast at 6, but the lunch or the eating area didn't open until 7. Well, they let him just go into the kitchen and make his own breakfast because they were watching him and knew that he had not progressed. I mean, these were just really good people. One of the things you need to do, and this is my advice about it, is go in, talk to the not just the salesperson, but some of the staff. What's some other advice on looking for a memory care facility?
Well, just making sure that you are, when you're looking at these resources, now obviously on our resource list, we do vet these resources prior to putting them on our resource list, but maybe choosing a few places that you can schedule a visit, and then maybe scheduling an unplanned visit that's more of an organic experience. Also,
oh yeah, mine were unplanned visits because I didn't have time to schedule anything. I was given a list of facilities in the area, and I got in the car and started going from one to the other, and my experience was, oh hell no, oh this one's even worse than the last one.
But also, another tip is also looking at the Department of Aging and Disability Services. They have a website called Quality Reporting Scores. And for anybody who is licensed in the state of Texas to care for anyone, you can look on their website. You can look at their quality reporting scores of that facility. We do that as well. But also, when you're going to visit these facilities, making sure that you ask them about the type of training and certifications they have specifically when it comes to care for a person who is living with a form of dementia, because there are some facilities that may have a certain unit, but they may not have the training or the certification to care for that particular issue. Looking at the staffing, looking at the residents and how they're responding to the environment, taking a tour, and then asking them, talking with them about kind of what their treatment plans are for the residents, the type of activities that they have. Also getting familiar with the ombudsman. There are ombudsmen who are volunteers who are licensed by the state to regulate a lot of these facilities, and getting in contact with them, getting familiar with them. And also, I always say, working with the staff. Any facility that you choose after you go through the business of, finances and things like that, working with the staff, getting to know the staff, becoming a partner with that staff, because these are the people that are going to be an extension of you, and making sure you're comfortable with them and they're comfortable with you, and that you understand their policies and procedures, and also knowing your residents' rights. That should be listed and posted everywhere. If you don't see it, that's an issue.
And that can be especially important for folks in the LGBT community. Not only as a queer person taking care of a relative, being a caregiver, and living that role, but also as the person who's experiencing the changes that Alzheimer's brings to themselves. And that can be difficult, because we've had guests on the show before where we talk about elder care and aging, and the fact that there are facilities now that are very, very LGBT friendly and supportive, but there are also many that are not. And it's really important to understand whether you're the caregiver or the patient, so to speak. You need that kind of a welcoming environment.
And that's one of the questions you want. That's a great point. That's one of the questions you want to ask too when you're talking about their training. Ask them about cultural competency. As you know, we've all been in this work world. When they talk about cultural competency, they're talking about diversity. They're talking about all of that. And so, making sure that that facility has had that type of training, and that they are letting you know what type of training the facility has had, the residents, and making sure that you are confident and comfortable, because that's very important.
There's another layer on this when we're dealing with Alzheimer's. If the resident is the LGBT person, we've talked quite a bit about, in regular nursing facilities, the person going into the facility goes back into the closet, which I think is a horrible thing for that person to have to do. And I've always said, I can't go back in the closet because I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how to do that. But other people who might have even thought about going, when you have Alzheimer's, you might not remember that you're back in the closet.
Or it may be a different experience where even in the nature of the disease, depending on how far you're going back, maybe you're in your mind coming out for the first time. So it's just understanding how to talk to the facility about those types of issues. What type of programs do they have? What type of training is happening? That's very, very important. And also, when I talked about earlier, ombudsman, if you at any point in time feel like maybe you're going to encounter some issues specifically because of that, getting familiar with the ombudsman that services that facility, because that is very important. That is their job. They are there to make sure that everybody who accesses this service is treated fairly and is comfortable, and they will do that investigation with the state.
And I know too, there's some facilities and services that allow the resident to have a pet, and I think that's a great thing. I know when I'm older, I want my pets, but I think that's a great way to get some comfort in a very potentially harrowing experience, and changing your home and changing where you live and your level of independence and such. Having that comfort of a pet would be, that would be huge.
Absolutely, and that's a part of that investigation, seeing what their policies are. And sometimes some facilities are great. They have programs where they have like a facility pet that is the companion pet for the residents, and it's a pet-friendly program.
I want to go back to just even the symptoms and recognizing that somebody has Alzheimer's, since there isn't one blood tests that you take, with your normal battery of tests that you take when you go to your annual physical at your primary care physician. Your spouse especially might not notice your symptoms because generally the beginning of Alzheimer's is a slow, steady decline. And you just might not notice it. But you might have friends or acquaintances that you don't see that often who leave and go, and I might want to say, Aaron, I haven't seen Patti in months, and I really noticed a decline in her mental ability. What do you do?
Well, in a situation like that, because we do encounter that quite a bit, sometimes it's hard for us to know what's going on with our loved ones because we're the closest to them. And sometimes we may have even noticed things, but we kind of dismiss it. So I would say if you are noticing that your friends or family members, hey, and you're trying to tell their loved one, hey, I really think you should look into this. I think the best thing to do, a lot of people, what they do is before they have that conversation, they will call us. And we have a document, we have a brochure, we have a topic sheet, we can talk about it over the phone. But it's one of our core curriculum classes is Know the 10 Signs. And we have some information that you can pass on to that person. Hey, these are the things I noticed. It's actually called a Know the 10 Signs checklist. So you can actually go through the signs and then kind of write down an example of something you've seen and have that discussion with that person. Say, hey, I really think you need to go get this checked out. This is something that I've noticed. This is a little different. So that's always a good way to have that conversation. And, just keep having that conversation, give them that information, and, just try to be as compassionate as possible because that is a journey, and some people are not always ready to have that.
For me, the compassionate part.
Some people are not ready to have that conversation initially until things change and things get a little bit worse.
And I think that's interesting too. You say symptom versus sign. A symptom is typically something that the patient reports, and that only the patient can report. But signs are things that anybody can see, like signs of a heart attack, signs of a stroke, signs of Alzheimer's. And so to know what those are, and have that list handy if you think that might be a situation that you're encountering somewhere in your life.
We're almost out of time. I want to go through the symptoms again. Severe memory loss.
Severe memory loss, the type of memory loss that completely disrupts their day. There's just not the ability to retrace their steps or remember.
Right. We're not talking about I can't find the keys.
Right. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about I can't find the keys and I literally cannot retrace my steps, so the keys are lost. There are no more keys. Or I'm going on a trip, I pick up the phone to pick up my cell phone, but I can't remember how to use the phone.
Not I can't remember where the phone is. That's normal. You put it down.
Yeah. I can't remember how to use the phone.
Yeah.
Or I don't remember. I have a moment where I'm in my house. I don't remember how to get downstairs. I don't remember how to get to the guest bathroom. That type of memory loss. Personality changes that are very severe. Complete and total changes in personality.
Problems, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Problems with judgment and, just being able to reason and understand concepts. Changes in speaking, and the ability to have conversations, repetitive questions, that reset. Like, I asked you the same question probably 4 to 5 times within an hour, but in my mind, I'm still waiting for the answer. I still need you to answer that question. So
So my asking you the symptoms 5 times this hour is one of those, because I just...
But see, you just retrace your steps. So
I did. You're right.
Yes. So just understanding that
I was doing it for Patti. She didn't remember.
So that kind of thing, that's completely abnormal, and that's definitely something that deserves a checkup because that's abnormal. You're not supposed to lose pockets of time. You're not supposed to be able to not recall people and places that are familiar to you that are a part of your set routine.
And as far as behavior, the behavior I noticed with my father was this nervousness when he wasn't in a familiar surrounding. So agitation, severe agitation.
High anxiety, transition changes are very, very hard on people who are living with forms of dementia. Like, I've encountered people who, before they stopped driving, the biggest issue was driving in traffic. They were so anxious because it just, everything was heightened times 10 now. Now I'm at a busy intersection. You know, maybe a year ago, I just kind of shouldered through it, but now I am in complete
The light
distress.
turned green. What do I do?
Right. What do I do? Wait a minute, I can't remember how to make this turn to get to my apartment now. Oh my God, these people are coming way too close to me. What do I do? So that type of anxiety.
Good. That gets us to the end of the show, actually. We're completely out of time. We'll be back next week with more Lambda Weekly. Have a good week. And thank you, Tanisha.
Thank you for having me.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.